Midnight. Tallinn's ancient spires ignite in fireworks. A white Russian count clutches a golden reliquary, then collapses, a silver dagger buried in his heart. The relic vanishes. One dagger becomes two. One death becomes two. In a Baroque mansion above the city, Miss Jane Marple, unassuming English spinster, watches scarlet sealing wax melt into lies, violet silk tear into gilt, and a charity auction bleed into murder. Who struck beneath the midnight spires? The answer lies in a drop of wax, a stolen bone, and a woman who sealed her fate with her own hand. Murder under the midnight spires of Tallinn, an Agatha Christie mystery where every tick of the cathedral clock tightens the noose. Chapter 1. The invitation from the North Jane Marple had taken Danemead for the summer because the roses there were old-fashioned and the chimneys drew well. The house stood a mile outside Lyminster, on a lane where the hedgerows met overhead, and the air carried the faint, sweet smell of meadowsweet. It was the sort of place where nothing ever happened, and consequently everything of importance was noticed. On the morning in question, she was engaged in trimming the dead heads from a clump of sweet williams when the postman's bicycle bell gave its usual apologetic ting. He handed over a single letter, thick cream paper, the flap secured by a blob of scarlet wax impressed with a crest she did not recognize. Inside the envelope lay a card edged in silver. Mrs. Harold Selby requests the pleasure of Miss Jane Marple's company at the Midnight Spires Festival Tallinn, Estonia, Shitur 21st, Wadis 24th of June. A smaller note, in a dashing hand, was clipped to the card. My dear Miss Marple, you once told me at the Red Cross Fête that you had never seen the Baltic. Remedy that omission. The old town is all crooked lanes and conspiracies. You will feel quite at home. Harold's new steamer leaves Tilbury on the 14th. Do say yes. Yours ever, Vanessa. Miss Marple turned the card over in her thin, capable hands. Vanessa Selby, formerly Vanessa Craig, had been a lively girl at the Rhodian summer dance in 1906, all scarlet ribbons and indiscretions. She had married first a diplomat, then, after his unfortunate end in a lift shaft in Prague, the shipping magnate Harold Selby. Rumour placed the Selby fortune somewhere between comfortable and colossal. The Baltic. Miss Marple had read of Tallinn in the geographical magazines at the Lyminster Free Library. A walled city of merchants and monks, of amber and intrigue. She pictured narrow streets climbing between red-tiled roofs, the green copper domes of Russian churches catching the low northern sun. A little shiver, not of apprehension but of anticipation, passed through her. She went indoors to consult Bradshaw's Continental Guide. The Nordic Star sailed at 9 in the evening, allowing a civilized afternoon in London for the purchase of suitable woolens. Miss Marple disliked being cold. She also disliked ostentation. A navy coat, skirt, a grey silk dress for evenings, and the new pair of stout walking shoes would suffice. That evening she wrote 2 letters. The first, to her nephew Raymond, explained that she was accepting an invitation abroad and would be away 3 weeks. The second, to Mrs. Bantry in Danemead, requested that the gardener keep an eye on the lupins, and that the cat, Tiddles, be given a saucer of milk nightly. On the 14th of June, she locked the front door of Danemead, left the key beneath the obvious flower pot, and took the 11:42 to town. At Tilbury, the Nordic Star lay alongside, white and immaculate, her funnels already exhaling a courteous plume of steam. A steward in brass buttons relieved Miss Marple of her modest valise, and showed her to a cabin on the promenade deck. It smelled agreeably of varnish and salt. As the ship eased clear of the docks and the gulls wheeled astern, Miss Marple stood at the rail, watching the Essex marshes slide away. She felt, as she sometimes did on the threshold of a journey, the faint stirring of that curiosity which had so often led her, quite innocently, into the heart of other people's tragedies. The invitation had spoken of crooked lanes and conspiracies. Miss Marple smiled a small, private smile. One never knew, did one? Chapter 2. The House on the Hill. The Nordic Star docked at Tallinn on a morning so clear that every spire and weather vane stood out like black embroidery against a sky the colour of forget-me-nots. Miss Marple, fortified by an excellent breakfast of smoked sprats and rye bread, descended the gangway with the deliberate care of one who has learned that foreign keys are treacherous to the unwary ankle. A motor car waited, long, black and faintly funereal, its chauffeur holding a board lettered Miss Marple in neat white paint. The drive upward to Tumpia took no more than 10 minutes, yet it carried her through centuries. Below the limestone cliff, the lower town sprawled in a tangle of red roofs and church domes. Above, the upper town kept its medieval silence behind walls thick enough to muffle a cannon. The car passed beneath the arch of the Patkuli gate and climbed a cobbled lane so narrow that the wings of the vehicle almost scraped the house fronts. At the summit, it halted before a pair of wrought-iron gates, flanked by stone pineapples green with age. A manservant in a striped waistcoat admitted her into a courtyard where a single lime tree shed pale blossoms on the flags. The house itself rose 3 stories, its facade a restrained baroque of pale yellow plaster and white pilasters. Tall windows reflected the sky. From one of them, a curtain twitched, as though someone had been watching for her arrival. Mrs. Vanessa Selby received her in the long salon, a room of such calculated elegance that Miss Marple felt an immediate sympathy with the furniture, which looked as though it, too, had been chosen for durability rather than display. The parquet was waxed to a walnut glow. A crystal chandelier trembled gently in the draught from the open casements. Mrs. Selby herself wore violet silk that rustled when she moved, and a triple string of pearls that caught the light like drops of cream. "My dear Miss Marple," she advanced with both hands outstretched, 20 years, and you have not altered by a single hairpin. Nor you, Vanessa, though I observe that matrimony has added a certain authority to your carriage." Mrs. Selby laughed, a sound like champagne released too quickly. "Harold insists upon it. Come, let me present him." Mr. Felix Selby, he had discarded the late diplomat's name along with the diplomat, stood by the marble chimney-piece turning a cigarette in fingers the colour of teak. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with a seafarer's tan and eyes the cold blue of pack-ice. His bow was courteous, but Miss Marple noticed that his gaze assessed her as it might a cargo manifest. Weight, value, possible damage. "Welcome to Tallinn, ma'am. Vanessa has spoken of you often. I trust the voyage was smooth?" "Admirably so. The Nordic Star is a credit to your fleet." A flicker of pleasure crossed his face. He was, she perceived, a man who liked his possessions praised. He rang a small silver bell. A maid in black with a lace apron brought coffee in cups so fragile that Miss Marple feared for her elderly knuckles. While they drank, Mrs. Selby talked of the festival. "We open the house tomorrow night for a reception. Everyone who matters will be here. The British consul, Prince Dolgoruki, who claims descent from Rurik and lives on the proceeds of icon smuggling, our dear Dr. Clement, who catalogues the collection, and of course Count Orloff, who has promised the reliquary." "The reliquary?" Miss Marple inquired. "A finger bone of St. Birgitta, 14th century, mounted in gold filigree. It belongs to the charity auction. The Count is bringing it personally." Mrs. Selby's tone implied that the Count's personal attention was a mixed blessing. Mr. Selby stubbed out his cigarette with unnecessary force. "Orloff is late with everything except his bills. If he fails us, the Ladies' Aid will be short by 5,000 krooni. Darling, do not fret in front of our guest." Mrs. Selby turned to Miss Marple. "You shall have the tower room. It overlooks the cathedral and catches the breeze. Lunch at 1. Afterwards, I will show you the gallery." The tower room proved to be a circular chamber, at the apex of a staircase so narrow that Miss Marple was glad she travelled light. A four-poster bed hung with brocade the colour of moss dominated the space. A writing desk stood beneath a lancet window, through which she could see the onion domes of Alexander Nevsky glowing like great pearls in the sun. On the mantelpiece, a porcelain clock ticked with the precision of a conscientious heart. She unpacked methodically. 3 cardigans, 2 pairs of lisle stockings, the navy, dress, the grey silk, a tin of bicarbonate of soda, and her knitting. From the bottom of the valise she drew a small leather-bound notebook and a propelling pencil. One never knew when a detail might prove significant. At 1 o'clock she descended to the dining room, a panelled apartment where a long table was laid for 6. Besides the Selbys, there was Dr. Erich Clement, a thin, desiccated man with a scholar's stoop and the faint aroma of formalin. Mr. Paul Hind, the young attaché from the British legation, pink-cheeked and earnest, and an empty place. "Count Orloff is detained," Mrs. Selby explained, unfolding her napkin. "He telephoned from the lower town. Some difficulty with customs." The meal was excellent. Clear beef broth, with marrow dumplings, salmon in dill sauce, and a compote of cloudberries that made Miss Marple think wistfully of English greengages. Conversation flowed in 3 languages. Mr. Hind translated when courtesy demanded. Dr. Clement spoke of provenance and carbon dating. Mr. Selby of freight rates and ice-breaking schedules. Beneath the civility, Miss Marple detected currents. A constraint between host and hostess, a flicker of unease whenever the Count's name was mentioned. After luncheon, Mrs. Selby led her upstairs to the gallery. It occupied the entire attic floor, a single vast room lit by dormers and a cupola of coloured glass. Glass cabinets marched in orderly ranks, each labelled in Dr. Clement's spidery hand. Amber beads the size of pigeons' eggs. A silver-gilt chalice encrusted with cabochon rubies. A miniature icon of the Virgin where the tears were seed pearls. In the centre, on a pedestal of black marble, stood an empty velvet cushion. "That is for the reliquary," Mrs. Selby said. "The Count was to have placed it there yesterday. Instead," she gestured towards a neighbouring case. A narrow dagger lay on faded crimson, its blade no longer than a lady's finger. The hilt worked into a knot of Baltic silver. He spent an hour admiring this, said it reminded him of a duel in Odessa. Miss Marple bent to examine the weapon. The blade was clean, the point keen. A small placard read, "Estonian, Siwu 1780, property of the Selby collection." "Curious choice for a charity auction," she murmured. Mrs. Selby gave a brittle laugh. Sergei Orlov collects curiosities the way other men collect stamps. He promised the reliquary would eclipse everything. From the cupola, a shaft of sunlight struck the dagger, turning the silver to molten white. Miss Marple noticed a smear upon the floorboards near the pedestal. Scarlet, waxy, no larger than a sixpence. She said nothing, but her mild blue eyes lingered. Tea was served in the winter garden, a glass-roofed annex filled with palms and the drowsy hum of bees. Mr. Hind joined them, apologizing for his earlier absence at luncheon. Legation business, he explained. One of our nationals lost his passport in a tavern brawl. The Count was involved indirectly. Indirectly. Mrs. Selby's tone sharpened. Hind flushed. He sold the fellow a forged icon, apparently. The man was trying to pawn it when the police intervened. Mr. Selby, who had been reading a cablegram, looked up. Orloff sails close to the wind, always has. Dr. Clement entered, carrying a ledger. The inventory is complete, save for the reliquary. I have left the case unlocked against its arrival. He spoke with the satisfaction of a man who dislikes loose ends. Miss Marple sipped her tea, lapsang souchong properly brewed, and observed the company. Mrs. Selby's fingers worried the pearls at her throat. Mr. Selby's jaw worked as though chewing an unpleasant thought. Young Hind avoided the doctor's eye. Dr. Clement polished his spectacles with a corner of his coat. The scarlet smear on the gallery floor recurred to her mind. Someone, she reflected, had been careless. At dusk the bells of the cathedral began to ring for vespers, a deep bronze clamour that rolled across the rooftops and set the crystal pendants of the chandelier trembling. Mrs. Selby rose. Tonight we dine quietly, only ourselves and Mr. Hind. Tomorrow the house fills. You will wish to rest, Miss Marple. The festival begins at 11, the fireworks at midnight. One must be punctual for murder. She said it lightly, as a jest. Miss Marple smiled politely and gathered her knitting. In her experience, murder was rarely punctual, but it was always instructive. Chapter 3. The Midnight Festival. The reception began at 9, but the true festival spilled into the square only when the cathedral clock had chimed 11, and the last pale streak of daylight had vanished behind the Pick Herman Tower. Miss Marple, escorted down the hill by Paul Hind, found the lower town transformed. Lanterns of coloured glass hung from every archway. Stalls offered hot mead and sugared almonds. A band of zither players struck up a waltz that made the cobblestones themselves seem to sway. Hind guided her through the press with the proprietary air of a young man who believes himself indispensable. He wore evening dress with a stiffness that suggested the studs had been borrowed. His fair hair was slicked flat with water. Mrs. Selby asked me to keep you in sight, he explained. The crowd is rougher than it looks. Pickpockets, white Russians, dockhands on leave. One never knows. Miss Marple, in her grey silk and the small silver brooch that had belonged to her mother, felt agreeably anonymous. She carried a light wool shawl against the night air, and her knitting bag, which contained, besides the eternal sock, a small torch and a packet of peppermints. They reached the square before the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral. Torches flared in iron sconces. The onion domes, gilded by day, now loomed black against a sky pricked with early stars. A platform had been erected for the charity auction. Upon it stood the empty velvet cushion from the gallery, flanked by two constables in dark green uniforms. Mrs. Selby, magnificent in amethyst velvet and the famous pearls moved among the bidders like a galleon under full sail. Mr. Selby was nowhere visible. "Count Orloff has not arrived," Hind murmured. "Mrs. Selby is furious. She expected him an hour ago." Miss Marple's mild gaze travelled over the throng. Dr. Clement stood beside the platform, ledger in hand, peering short-sightedly at his watch. A cluster of ladies from the English Church Guild exclaimed over trays of amber jewellery. Somewhere a child began to cry, the sound thin and forlorn above the music. At 11:45, the band ceased abruptly. A drum rolled. The mayor, a stout personage in a chain of office, mounted the steps and began a speech in Estonian. Miss Marple caught the words Hiitekivas and Pyha Birgitta, charity and the saint. Applause rippled. Mrs. Selby smiled with mechanical brilliance. Hind shifted restlessly. "I must find Selby. He promised to introduce me to the harbour master. Will you be all right for 5 minutes?" "Perfectly, dear. I shall stand just here by the fountain." He vanished into the crowd. Miss Marple settled her shawl and observed. To her left, a group of sailors argued in Swedish. To her right, a woman in a scarlet cloak sold paper windmills to children. Directly ahead, beneath the cathedral porch, a tall man in a black cape detached himself from the shadows and began to thread his way toward the platform. Even at a distance, Miss Marple recognized the swagger, the tilt of the head. Count Orloff had arrived. He mounted the steps 2 at a time. Mrs. Selby's smile became genuine. She extended both hands. The Count bowed over them with theatrical grace, then produced from beneath his cape a small casket of chased gold. A sigh went up from the crowd. Dr. Clement hurried forward to receive it. The mayor resumed his speech. Fireworks were promised at the stroke of 12. The reliquary would be unveiled immediately after. Miss Marple noted that the Count's cape was lined with violet silk, precisely the shade of Mrs. Selby's gown. A curious coincidence, she thought, and tucked it away. The cathedral clock began to strike. 1, 2, 3. On the 4th stroke, the first rocket soared, bursting in a fountain of green stars. The crowd oohed. On the 5th, a second rocket crimson. By the 8th, the sky was a riot of colour and the square lit as though by day. Miss Marple, hemmed in by shoulders, craned to see the platform. Count Orloff had turned to speak to someone just behind him. The fireworks reached their climax, a deafening barrage that drowned the bells. In that instant of blinding light and noise, a woman screamed, high, incredulous, cut off almost before it began. The rockets died. Darkness rushed back, deeper for the glare that had preceded it. Torches flickered, people blinked and muttered. Then another scream, closer, and the crowd parted like water round a stone. Count Sergei Orloff lay face down on the ancient cobbles, arms flung wide. Between his shoulder blades protruded the hilt of the narrow silver dagger from the Selby gallery. A dark stain spread across the black cloth, blacker still under the torchlight. His cape had fallen open. The violet lining looked suddenly garish, almost obscene. For a moment, no one moved. Then Dr. Clement dropped to his knees beside the body, fingers fumbling at the wrist. Mrs. Selby stood as though frozen, one hand pressed to her pearls. The mayor gobbled something in Estonian. The constables pushed forward, shouting for room. Miss Marple, small and inconspicuous, edged nearer. She saw the Count's right hand still clutched the golden casket. The lid had sprung open in the fall, revealing a cavity lined with faded crimson velvet. Empty. The reliquary was gone. A whistle shrilled. More police appeared, bulky in their greatcoats. Someone began to sob. The band, uncertain, struck up a waltz and was silenced by an officer's bark. Paul Hind materialized at Miss Marple's elbow, breathless. "I heard the scream. Good God, is he—" "Dead," she said quietly. "Almost certainly." Hind stared at the dagger. "That's from the house. I saw it this afternoon." "Yes." Miss Marple's tone was tranquil, but her eyes were busy. The wound was neat, the blade driven upward beneath the scapula with economical force. A woman's stroke, perhaps, or a man's who knew exactly where to place it. The Count's Homburg had rolled a little distance. Beneath it lay a single pearl, perfectly round, the size of a currant. Mrs. Selby found her voice. "Lock the gates," she called, imperious even in shock. "No one is to leave." The officer in charge, a square-headed man with a moustache like a yard broom, saluted. "Already done, madam." He turned to the crowd. "Remain calm. Identities will be checked." Miss Marple slipped the pearl into her glove before anyone noticed. Around her the festival dissolved into confusion. Women clutching handbags, men lighting cigarettes with shaking hands, children lifted onto shoulders to see the excitement. The zither players had vanished. In their place the police moved methodically, notebooks open. Dr. Clement rose, wiping his fingers on a handkerchief. "Instantaneous," he announced to the officer. "The blade pierced the heart." The officer nodded. "Name? Count Sergei Orlov, Russian émigré. Address—" He looked at Mrs. Selby. "Hotel Golden Lion," she supplied. Her voice was steady now, but the pearls trembled against her throat. Miss Marple observed that Mr. Selby had appeared at last, pushing through from the direction of the town hall. His face was flushed. A smear of what might have been grease darkened one cuff. He took his wife's arm with a grip that looked protective, but might have been restraining. Hind whispered, "I must find the consul. There will be questions, passports, diplomatic immunity." He hesitated. "Will you be all right?" "Perfectly," Miss Marple assured him. "I shall wait by the fountain. The police will wish to speak to everyone." She watched him go, then turned back to the scene. The body had been covered with a constable's cape. The dagger remained in place, a macabre marker. Photographers from the local paper were already at work, flashes popping like late fireworks. Somewhere a clock struck the quarter. Miss Marple seated herself on the rim of the fountain and opened her knitting bag. The sock grew by 3 rows while she reviewed the sequence. The Count's arrival, the fireworks, the scream, the discovery. Someone had known precisely when and where to strike. Someone had removed the reliquary in the same instant. Someone had dropped a pearl. She glanced up. Mrs. Selby was speaking urgently to her husband. Dr. Clement hovered. Ledger clutched to his chest like a shield. The scarlet-cloaked woman had disappeared. The sailors were being questioned in a mixture of languages. The child had stopped crying. A young constable approached, cap in hand. "Madam, your name and papers, please." Miss Marple produced her passport with a smile that disarmed suspicion. "Jane Marple, British subject, guest of Mrs. Selby, at Tumpia. I saw nothing, I fear. The fireworks were very bright." He wrote laboriously, thanked her, moved on. She resumed her knitting. The sock was intended for her nephew Raymond. By the time it was finished, she reflected, she might know who had killed Count Orloff, and why the reliquary had vanished with him. Above the square, the cathedral spires stood black against the stars. silent witnesses to a drama older than any of them. The torches burned lower. The smell of gunpowder lingered. Somewhere in the distance, a dog began to bark, a thin, insistent sound that carried the first hint of morning. Chapter 4. The constabulary arrives. Inspector Jury Cask arrived at the square with the unhurried authority of a man who has seen too many corpses to be impressed by one more. He was broad through the chest, square through the jaw, and his uniform coat strained at the buttons as though resenting the confinement. A scar, pale and thin, ran from the corner of his left eye to the edge of his moustache. It gave him the look of a man who had once lost a duel and learned from the experience. He dismissed the photographers with a flick of 2 fingers, then stood over the body, while the police surgeon knelt under the torchlight. The surgeon was a small, neat man with a goatee. He spoke in rapid Estonian, punctuating each sentence with a tug at the dagger's hilt. Single thrust, he concluded in German for the benefit of the foreign guests, upward, between the 5th and 6th ribs, severing the aorta. Death within seconds. The weapon is yours, madam. He addressed Mrs. Selby. She inclined her head. From our gallery. Estonian silver. Late 18th century. Cask grunted. He had not taken his eyes from the dead man's face. Count Sergei Orlov. I know the name. Passports, forged icons, unpaid gambling debts. A busy gentleman. He turned to the nearest constable. Seal the square. No one leaves without my mark on their papers. Photographs of the crowd. Everyone. A murmur rose. The mayor protested about civic dignity. A White Russian prince invoked diplomatic privilege. Cask ignored them. He beckoned Dr. Clement. You examined the body first? I felt for the pulse, Clement said precisely. There was none. The casket was in his hand. It fell open when he collapsed. Cask picked up the golden box with a gloved finger. Empty. He sniffed the velvet lining, then closed the lid with a snap. Fingerprints later. Bag it. Miss Marple, still seated by the fountain, watched the inspector's methodical progress. He moved like a chess player who sees the board entire, the position of every piece, the threat behind every square. She approved. She also noted the small things, the way Mrs. Selby's left hand kept smoothing the violet silk at her waist, the grease on Mr. Selby's cuff that had now become a dark stain, the absence of the woman in the scarlet cloak. Cask approached the Selby party. Madam, sir, a word. He led them beneath the cathedral porch, where the torches threw long shadows. Miss Marple, unnoticed, followed at a discreet distance and stationed herself behind a pillar. The knitting needles clicked softly. Mrs. Selby spoke first. Inspector, this is monstrous. The Count was our guest. The festival will continue without him, Cask said. Tell me exactly when you last saw him alive. He arrived during the mayor's speech, Mrs. Selby said. I greeted him on the platform. He gave me the casket. Here you have it. Then the fireworks began. I turned to speak to Lady Pruitt about the bidding. When the lights died, he was there. Her voice faltered. Mr. Selby cleared his throat. I was at the town hall, arranging the harbour master's subscription. I heard the scream and came at once. Cask's eyes flicked to the stained cuff. Grease. From the winch on the launch. I inspected it this afternoon. The inspector made a note. Dr. Clement, I was beside the pedestal, ready to receive the reliquary. The Count handed me the casket. I placed it on the cushion. Then the rockets. I looked away for a moment, perhaps 3 seconds. When I looked back, he was falling. 3 seconds, Cask repeated. Enough, if one is prepared. He turned to the constable. "Search the square for the missing relic. Every drain, every flower bed." Miss Marple slipped from behind the pillar and approached. "Inspector, may I see the dagger before it is removed?" Cask's brows rose, but something in her mild gaze made him nod. The surgeon withdrew the blade with a small, wet sound. It was slender, perfectly balanced, the silver hilt chased with a pattern of interlaced vines. A trace of blood darkened the groove. "Clean except for the wound," the surgeon said. "No fingerprints, the hilt is too narrow, and the murderer wore gloves." Miss Marple bent closer. "Yet there is a scratch on the blade, just above the blood, fresh, and here she indicated a faint smear near the guard. Wax, I think, scarlet." Cask took the dagger, held it to the torch. The smear was unmistakable. "From the gallery case?" "Possibly," Miss Marple said. "The seal was broken and resealed, perhaps to remove the dagger earlier." Mrs. Selby's hand flew to her throat. "Our sealing wax is kept in my boudoir. Anyone with access," Cask finished. He wrapped the dagger in oilskin. "The body to the morgue. Full autopsy by morning. You," he pointed at Mr. Selby, "will come to the prefecture at 9 to make a statement. Madam, you also. Dr. Clement, the gallery will be locked and guarded tonight." Clement inclined his head. "As you wish." The inspector raised his voice to the crowd. "Disperse quietly. Papers will be checked at the gates. Anyone attempting to leave the upper town without permission will be detained." A ripple of protest, quickly stifled. The torches were extinguished one by one. The square emptied until only the police and the Selby party remained. The body lay alone beneath the constable's cape, a dark island in the starlight. Paul Hind appeared, escorting the British consul, a thin man with a diplomatic cough. "Inspector, these ladies and gentlemen are under my protection." Cask's scar twitched. "They will be escorted to their homes. Statements tomorrow." He turned to Miss Marple. "You, madam, saw nothing." "I saw the fireworks," she said, "and the pearl." She opened her glove. The small white sphere rolled into Cask's palm. "From the Countess Orloff's necklace," Mrs. Selby whispered. "She wore it tonight. 3 strands, graduated. She was standing near the platform when, Cask prompted. "I did not see her after the scream." Cask pocketed the pearl. "Find the Countess. Bring her to the prefecture." He saluted the consul. "My apologies for the inconvenience. Good night." The walk back to Tumpia was silent. The Selbys went ahead with Dr. Clement. Hind offered Miss Marple his arm. The cobbles were slick with dew. Somewhere a nightingale practiced a tentative phrase. In the courtyard, the lime tree had shed more blossoms. They lay like pale confetti on the flags. The manservant admitted them, with a face stiff from shock. Mrs. Selby paused in the hall. "Brandy in the winter garden," she said. "We all need it." The glass-roofed room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. The palms cast spidery shadows. The air smelled of earth and cognac. Mr. Selby poured with a steady hand, but the decanter rattled against the glass. "To absent friends," he said, and drank. Miss Marple accepted a bêche thimbleful. She disliked spirits, but recognized the need for ritual. She watched the others. Mrs. Selby's knuckles white on the stem, Clement's Adam's apple working as he swallowed, Hind staring into his glass as though it held the future. At length, Mrs. Selby set down her glass. "The festival is ruined. The charity will suffer. And Sergei," her voice broke, "was not universally loved," her husband finished, "but murder in our square, with our dagger." "Someone hated him enough," Clement said quietly. or wanted the reliquary enough. Miss Marple sipped her brandy. It burned pleasantly. The reliquary is small, she observed, easily concealed, yet the murderer left the casket. Curious. Hind looked up. Perhaps the bone was never in it. Possible, Clement said. The Count was not always truthful. Mrs. Selby rose. I must telephone the Countess. She will be frantic. She swept out, violet skirts rustling. Mr. Selby followed, muttering about cables to Riga. Clement excused himself to check the gallery locks. Hind lingered. Miss Marple, what did you mean about the wax? Only that someone planned carefully, she said. The dagger was taken earlier, the case resealed to avoid suspicion. The murderer knew the Count would stand in that exact spot at midnight. Someone who knew the programme, and the Selby household. Hind's eyes widened. You think it was one of us? I think, Miss Marple said gently, that someone dropped a pearl, and someone else picked it up. She finished her brandy and stood. Good night, Mr. Hind. Tomorrow will be busy. Chapter 5. The Gallery of Secrets morning in Tallinn arrived with a pale, reluctant light that filtered through the tower room's lancet window, and laid a cold stripe across Miss Marple's counterpane. She woke at 6, as was her habit, and lay for a moment listening to the city stir, the clop of a milk cart on the cobbles below, the clang of a tram in the lower town, the faint metallic cry of gulls over the harbour. Somewhere a church bell struck the half-hour, then fell silent. The house itself remained hushed, as though holding its breath after the violence of the night. She rose, performed her modest toilet, and dressed in the navy coat and skirt, with a cardigan the colour of heather. Before descending, she opened her notebook and added a line beneath yesterday's entries. Countess Orloff, not found after murder. Pearl in my possession. At 7:30, she ventured downstairs. The long salon was deserted, the chandelier extinguished, the parquet filmed with dust where many feet had passed. In the winter garden, the brandy glasses stood in a forlorn circle. A palm frond had fallen across one chair like a green question mark. The manservant, hollow-eyed, informed her that coffee would be served in the small breakfast room. Mrs. Selby appeared at 8, pale but composed, in a wrapper of dove-grey silk. I telephoned the prefecture, she said without preamble. The Countess spent the night at the Golden Lion and has not left her suite. Inspector Kask is with her now. The poor woman is prostrate. Natural in the circumstances, Miss Marple murmured. And the reliquary? No trace. The square was searched until dawn. Drains, gutters, even the fountain basin. Nothing. Mrs. Selby pressed a hand to her temple. The charity will be the laughing-stock of the Baltic. Mr. Selby entered, freshly shaven but heavy-eyed. He poured coffee with the air of a man fueling a machine. Kask wants us at 10. Statements, fingerprints, the usual nonsense. I've cabled Riga. Our ships will be delayed until this is cleared. He glanced at Miss Marple. You'll come, of course. The old fox will want your impressions. I shall be delighted, she said mildly. Dr. Clement joined them, carrying a large key on a crimson ribbon. The gallery is locked as ordered. I thought, madam, you might wish to verify the other pieces before the police arrive. Mrs. Selby nodded. After breakfast, Miss Marple, will you accompany us? Your eye is sharper than mine. They finished in silence. The coffee was strong, the rolls crisp, but appetite was a casualty of the night. At 9, the party ascended to the attic floor. Dr. Clement unlocked the double doors with a flourish that seemed out of place. Sunlight poured through the cupola, striking sparks from the glass cases. Miss Marple walked slowly along the ranks. The amber beads, the chalice, the miniature icon, all present. She paused at the central pedestal. The velvet cushion bore a shallow depression where the casket had rested. Beside it lay a single strand of violet silk, no longer than her little finger. "From the Count's cape lining," Clement said, anticipating her question. "It must have caught as he fell." "Curious," Miss Marple said. "The cape was spread wide on the cobbles. This thread is clean." Clement flushed. "Aye, perhaps it tore earlier." She moved to the dagger case. The glass lid stood ajar. The crimson plush was indented. On the floorboards directly beneath, she noted again the scarlet smear, now dried to a hard button no larger than a shilling. She stooped, touched it with a gloved finger, and sniffed. "Sealing wax," she confirmed, "and fresh. The case was opened yesterday, the dagger removed, the lid closed and sealed to avoid immediate discovery." Mrs. Selby's hand went to her throat. "My wax is kept in the boudoir safe. Only I have the combination." "Unless someone watched you open it," Mr. Selby said. His tone was flat. Clement adjusted his spectacles. "The Count himself admired the dagger at 4 o'clock. He asked to hold it. I refused. Policy. But he was insistent. I turned to fetch the key for the reliquary case. When I returned, he was standing here." He indicated the pedestal. "Perhaps then—" "Perhaps," Miss Marple echoed. She opened her handbag and produced a small magnifying lens. Kneeling, an operation requiring care, she examined the wax smear. Broken flakes, the seal was pressed in haste, and here, she pointed to a hairline crack in the glass lid. The dagger was withdrawn carelessly. A gloved hand, I think. No prints. Mr. Selby shifted impatiently. "All very clever, but it tells us nothing about who took it." "On the contrary," Miss Marple said, rising. "It tells us the theft was planned before the Count arrived with the reliquary. The murderer needed a weapon known to be in the house, one that could be concealed in a cape or a lady's muff. The fireworks provided the moment, the crowd, the confusion." Clement closed the case with a click. The reliquary itself, gold, filigree, perhaps 10 centimetres long, easily hidden. Mrs. Selby's voice was brittle. If it was ever here, Sergei was capable of bringing an empty casket to raise the bidding. Miss Marple turned to the cupola. The coloured glass threw lozenges of red and blue across the floor. Yet he risked his life for it. Someone believed the bone was genuine. A clock in the lower house struck the quarter. Clement locked the doors. They descended to the hall where Paul Hind waited, hat in hand. "The consul's car is outside," he said. "Kask wants us all at the prefecture. They've found something in the cathedral crypt." The prefecture occupied a dour grey building beside the town hall. Inspector Kask received them in a room that smelled of pipe tobacco and wet wool. On the desk lay the golden casket, the dagger in its oilskin, and a small heap of objects. A lady's kid glove, a man's cufflink, a brass button. "The crypt search," Kask said without greeting. "A priest discovered these at dawn beneath the reliquary niche. The glove is monogrammed V.S. Your wife's, madam?" Mrs. Selby stared. "I have a dozen pairs, but yes, the monogram is mine. The cufflink bears the Selby crest. The button," he held it up, "from a naval greatcoat. Yours, sir?" Mr. Selby took it, frowning. "From my old uniform. I haven't worn it in years." Kask's scar twitched. "The crypt is directly beneath the square. A passage runs from the cathedral to the old Dominican cloister, disused, but the iron gate was forced. Someone hid there, waited, struck during the fireworks, then fled below with the reliquary. Hind leaned forward. The Countess? Still in her suite. 2 officers with her. She claims the Count gave her the glove yesterday to hold his cigarette case. Hysterical, but coherent. Miss Marple examined the glove. The kid was fine, the stitching delicate. A faint scent of attar of roses clung to the lining. The cufflink is tarnished, she observed, not recently worn. The button has grease upon it, similar to Mr. Selby's cuff last night. Cask's eyes narrowed. You notice much, madam? One notices what one is. Trained to see, she said modestly. The inspector opened a folder. Statements, Mrs. Selby. You greeted the Count, received the casket, turned away. Dr. Clement, you took the casket, placed it on the cushion. Mr. Selby, you were at the town hall. Mr. Hind, you left Miss Marple by the fountain, correct? All nodded. Yet the dagger was taken from a locked case, Cask continued. The keyring is kept in Dr. Clement's office. Who has access? Clement paled. The ring is on my desk. Anyone who knew the house, Miss Marple finished. Cask dismissed them with instructions to remain within call. In the corridor, Hind lingered. The crypt passage, he said. I walked it once with the verger. It comes out near the Selby gate, 10 minutes from square to house. Time enough, Miss Marple agreed, if one knew the way. Back at Tumpy luncheon was a silent affair. Mrs. Selby excused herself with a headache. Mr. Selby disappeared to his study. Clement returned to the gallery to recatalogue. Miss Marple asked for a tray in the winter garden and was joined by Hind. I've been thinking, he said, lowering his voice. The Count sold forged icons to half the legations in the Baltic. If the reliquary was a fake, someone paid a fortune for nothing. Or everything, Miss Marple said. A genuine relic would fetch more on the Paris market. Motive enough for murder. Hind buttered a roll he did not eat. Mrs. Selby pledged the charity 5,000 krone against the sale. If it vanishes, the Ladies' Aid suffers, and Mrs. Selby's reputation with it. A shadow fell across the table. Dr. Clement stood in the doorway, ledger in hand. Forgive the intrusion. The police have sealed the gallery. I thought to work in the library. He hesitated. There is something odd. The inventory shows a second dagger, identical to the murder weapon, missing since March. Miss Marple's needles paused. A pair, catalogued as such. The mate was lent to the National Museum for an exhibition. Returned last week. I entered it yesterday. He opened the ledger. Here, item 47B. Estonian silver, vine pattern, yet only one was in the case. Mr. Selby's voice came from the hall. Then the murderer took the wrong dagger. Or the right one, Miss Marple said softly. She finished her tea and asked to see the library. It was a sombre room of oak and leather, the air thick with the scent of old paper. Clement spread the ledger on the table. The entry was clear, 47A and 47B. Returned 14th of June, signed E. Clement. Miss Marple turned back a page, and here, item 46, the reliquary pedestal. Delivered empty 10th June for cleaning. No bone mentioned. Clement stared. But the Count promised a relic, she finished. Whether he delivered it is another matter. Outside, the cathedral bells began to toll for vespers. Miss Marple closed the ledger. The pattern was taking shape. A sealed case, a missing mate, an empty pedestal, a glove that smelled of roses. She thought of the scarlet wax, the violet silk, the pearl in her handbag. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked with the patience of justice. She returned to the winter garden and took up her knitting. The sock grew steadily, So did her certainty that the second death, when it came, would be no accident. Chapter 6. Motives in Miniature. The winter garden at 4 o'clock was a hothouse of suspicion. Sunlight slanted through the glass roof and turned the palms into green fountains. Dust motes drifted like slow gold in the air. Miss Marple sat in a cane chair with her knitting, the scarlet wool bright against her lap. Around her the principals assembled as though summoned by an invisible butler. Mrs. Selby in a tea-gown of coffee lace, Mr. Selby with a cablegram crumpled in one fist, Dr. Clement clutching his ledger like a hymnal, Paul Hind polishing his spectacles with unnecessary vigour. Mrs. Selby broke the silence. Inspector Cask telephoned. The Countess has been released. Grief, no evidence. The reliquary remains missing. The Charity Committee meets tomorrow to decide whether to cancel the auction. Her voice trembled on the last word. Mr. Selby tossed the cablegram onto a table. Riga refuses to load until insurance is clarified. One corpse and a missing bone, and my entire schedule collapses. Hind replaced his spectacles. The legation is issuing a statement. Forged icons, unpaid debts, Orloff was a liability. Someone may have done Europe a service. Clement cleared his throat. Service or not, the second dagger complicates matters. If the murderer took the wrong blade, or the right one, Miss Marple interposed mildly, let us consider motives, as though they were stitches in a pattern. One drops a stitch, and the whole row unravels. She laid her knitting aside and opened her notebook. Mrs. Selby, you pledged 5,000 krone against the reliquary. Its disappearance ruins the charity and your reputation. Mrs. Selby's lace rustled. I needed a success. The Ladies' Aid has snubbed me since my marriage. Harold's money is new. Mine is older than the cathedral. A triumph would silence them. Mr. Selby lit a cigarette, and I needed Orloff alive. He was about to expose a fraudulent manifest, cargo insured for twice its value. If the underwriters discovered it, I should have been finished. But murder? I strike with ledgers, not daggers. Hind flushed. The Count sold the second secretary, a virgin and child, for £3,000. It was painted last year in Warsaw. I warned Orloff to stop. He laughed, said the British were fools for sentiment. I was on the platform when the rockets began. Miss Marple saw me. I did, she confirmed. You never left my side until the scream. Clement polished his spectacles again. I catalogue. I do not kill. Yet the inventory is my responsibility. A missing dagger reflects on me. Miss Marple turned a page. Let us examine alibis as one examines wool for moths. Mrs. Selby, you turned from the Count to Lady Pruitt. Who stood behind him? Dr. Clement, I think, and the Mayor. Dr. Clement, you placed the casket on the cushion. Did you see the bone? Clement hesitated. The lid was closed. The Count said it was inside. I assumed. Assumption, Miss Marple said, is the moth in the wool. Mr. Selby, you were at the town hall. Yet your cuff was greased, and a naval button found in the crypt. I inspected the launch at 5, he said. The winch leaks. The button must have been torn off months ago. My old coat hangs in the boathouse. Hind leaned forward. The crypt passage emerges near the boathouse gate. Someone could leave the square, hide the reliquary, return through the crowd. Someone who knew the tunnel, Clement added. The gate is padlocked. The key is in my office with the dagger keys. Mrs. Selby's cup rattled in its saucer. My glove in the crypt, how? Borrowed, perhaps, Miss Marple suggested. Or planted. The scent of attar of roses is distinctive. Silence fell, broken only by the tick of the porcelain clock. Miss Marple resumed her knitting. In Leominster, we had a verger who sealed the communion wine with coloured wax to hide his pilfering. Scarlet wax like yours, madam. Only the guilty seal what they wish unseen. Mrs. Selby's hand flew to her throat. Anyone might use my wax. Anyone with the combination to your safe, Mr. Selby said dryly. Clement closed his ledger. The second dagger was returned from the museum on the 14th. I entered it myself, yet only one was in the case yesterday. Miss Marple's needles clicked. Then the murderer substituted the blades earlier, perhaps weeks ago. The museum dagger is clean. The Selby dagger carries the crime. A clever misdirection. Hind stared. But why? To implicate the household, she said, or to protect it. We must discover which. The clock struck 5. Outside, clouds gathered above the spires. The light turned sulphurous. A maid entered with a telegram for Mr. Selby. He read it, frowned, and crumpled it anew. Underwriters demand an immediate survey. I must go to the docks. He rose. Vanessa, you will manage here. Mrs. Selby nodded. Dr. Clement, will you dine with us? The police have sealed the gallery. There is nothing more to catalogue tonight. Clement bowed. With pleasure. Hind excused himself to the legation. Miss Marple asked for tea in the tower room. She climbed the narrow stair slowly, pausing on the landing to study a portrait of a Selby ancestor in naval uniform. The eyes were Felix's, the mouth Vanessa's. Family, she reflected, was a complicated pattern. In her room she opened the notebook again. Second dagger substituted. When? Glove planted or borrowed. Button from boathouse. Oh, old or recent. Wax seal broken in haste. She added a new line. Someone wishes the crime laid at the Selby's door. At 7 the dinner bell rang. Miss Marple descended to find the table laid for 4. Mr. Selby had not returned. Mrs. Selby, in black velvet, poured sherry with a steady hand. To clearer heads, she toasted. They drank. The soup was consommé madrilène. The fish, sole in white wine. Conversation limped. Dr. Clement spoke of medieval reliquaries. Mrs. Selby of the charity's plight. Miss Marple listened, her mild eyes missing nothing. The way Mrs. Selby's left hand kept smoothing the tablecloth, the way Clement's gaze flickered to the door whenever footsteps passed in the hall. After the sweet, a cloudberry fool, Mrs. Selby proposed coffee in the winter garden. Clement declined. I have notes to finish. The police return tomorrow. I must be precise. He bowed and departed. Mrs. Selby lingered. Miss Marple, walk with me on the terrace. The air is cooler. They stepped through the French windows. The garden lay in shadow. The lime tree shed its scent. Below, the lower town twinkled like a spilled jewel box. I am frightened, Mrs. Selby said suddenly. First Sergei, now this second dagger. Someone hates us. Or loves the charity donatives, Miss Marple suggested. 5,000 krone is a fortune to some. Mrs. Selby's laugh was bitter. To me it is pin money, but reputation. She broke off as a figure appeared at the gate. Mr. Selby, coat over his arm, face grim. The survey is complete, he said. No fraud, but the underwriters want the reliquary found, or the claim lapses. He looked at his wife. Vanessa, where is Clement? In the library, I suppose. I pass the library, empty, and the gallery door stands open. They hurried indoors. The attic stair was dark. A single bulb burned at the top. The gallery doors yawned wide. Inside, The cupola cast blood-red lozenges across the floor. Dr. Clement lay beneath the central pedestal, one arm outstretched toward the empty cushion. The heavy marble lid of a nearby sarcophagus had fallen, crushing his skull. Blood pooled black in the coloured light. Mrs. Selby screamed once, a sound cut short by her own hand. Mr. Selby knelt, felt for a pulse, shook his head. Dead! The lid is medieval! Tons of marble! It was propped with a bulk of timber. The timber is gone. Miss Marple stepped carefully around the blood. On the floor lay the missing reliquary. Gold filigree, the lid sprung open. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of violet silk, was a slender bone, yellow with age. Beside it, the second dagger, identical to the murder weapon, but clean, footsteps pounded below. The manservant appeared, white-faced. "The police telephoned. Inspector Cask is coming. Shall I—" "Show him up," Mr. Selby said. Miss Marple knelt, ignoring the ruin of her stockings. The silk was torn from a larger piece. The bone was genuine. She had seen similar in the British Museum. The dagger's hilt bore a tiny scratch, fresh. "The murderer returned the reliquary," she said quietly, and silenced the one man who knew the daggers had been switched. Mrs. Selby swayed. Her husband caught her. "Vanessa, sit down. You're faint." Miss Marple straightened. The timber was removed deliberately. Dr. Clement was lured here, perhaps by a note. The lid fell when he reached for the reliquary. Cask arrived with 2 constables. His scar seemed deeper in the crimson light. He took in the scene with a single sweep. 2 murders, 1 weapon missing, 1 relic recovered. Someone ties loose threads. He turned to Mrs. Selby. "Madam, your silk?" She stared at the violet scrap. "From my dressing gown. I tore it yesterday on a nail." Cask's eyes were winter sea. "We will speak in the library, all of you." Miss Marple lingered as the others filed out. She picked up the clean dagger with her handkerchief. The scratch matched the one on the murder weapon, made by the same hand. She slipped both relic and dagger into her knitting bag. The pattern was nearly complete. 1 more stitch, and the sleeve would be finished. Below, the cathedral clock struck 9. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Chapter 7. The second death Inspector Cask chose the library for his inquisition, a room that seemed to resent intrusion. The oak panels drank the lamplight. The leather-bound volumes exhaled dust and disapproval. A single green-shaded lamp threw a pool of brightness onto the central table, where 6 coffee cups had been arranged in a precise circle. Miss Marple's quiet stage management. The suspects filed in, Mrs. Selby supported by her husband, Paul Hind summoned from the legation by urgent telephone, the manservant hovering with a tray that rattled betrayingly. Cask took the chair at the head, his bulk reducing it to doll's furniture. He laid the blood-stained dagger, the clean twin, and the reliquary in a neat row, then placed the scrap of violet silk beside them like a conjurer revealing his final card. 2 deaths, he began without preamble. 1 blade, 1 bone, 1 thread of silk. We will have the truth tonight. Miss Marple, seated opposite, poured coffee with the calm of a hostess at a vicarage tea. She had changed into her grey silk. The blood-speckled stockings were hidden in her room. Her knitting lay untouched in her lap. Scarlet wool, the exact shade of the sealing wax. "Observe," she said softly, indicating the cups. 6 cups, 6 people who might have struck the blow. Yet only 1 hand could reach the heart at the precise instant of the fireworks. She turned to Mr. Selby. You, sir, quarrelled with the Count over a fraudulent manifest. Exposure would ruin you. Yet you are left-handed. The wound angles right to left. And you were at the town hall when the rockets began. Mr. Selby's jaw worked. I told you. Grease from the launch winch. The button in the crypt is from my old coat, stored in the boathouse. Stored, Miss Marple repeated. Yet the grease on your cuff last night was fresh. You inspected the launch at 5. The murder was at midnight. 7 hours for grease to dry. He shrugged. I touched the winch again when I returned. The survey. She passed to Hind. You feared exposure of forged icons. A scandal would end your career. Yet you never left my side during the fireworks. I watched you count the rockets aloud. Hind flushed. I was excited. One does not see such displays in London. Mrs. Selby's cup trembled. I needed the reliquary. Its loss destroys the charity, and me. But I turned away to speak to Lady Pruitt. Dr. Clement stood behind the Count. Clement was beyond answering. His absence at the table was a silent accusation. Miss Marple lifted the violet silk. This matches your dressing gown, madam. Torn yesterday, you said, on a nail. Yet the edges are clean, cut with scissors. And the reliquary was wrapped in it, placed beside Dr. Clement after death. Mrs. Selby's knuckles whitened. Anyone might take a scrap from my sewing basket. Anyone with access to your boudoir, Cask said, and to the sealing wax. Miss Marple opened her notebook. The pattern is simple. The dagger was removed from the gallery days, perhaps weeks ago. The case was resealed with scarlet wax to delay discovery. The murderer knew the Count would stand on the platform at midnight, knew the fireworks would mask the blow, knew the crypt passage led to the boathouse. She touched the clean dagger. This is the museum blade, substituted for the original. The murderer killed with the Selby dagger, then planted its twin to suggest the crime was spontaneous. But Dr. Clement noticed the switch in the inventory. He had to die. Cask leaned forward. Who lured him to the gallery? Miss Marple's gaze settled on the empty 6th cup. Someone he trusted. Someone who knew the sarcophagus lid was propped insecurely. Dr. Clement mentioned it weeks ago, complaining of the danger. Someone who left the reliquary as bait. Mrs. Selby rose abruptly. This is intolerable. I shall fetch my wrap. She swept toward the door. Cask's voice cracked like a whip. Sit down, madam, she froze. Miss Marple continued, gentle as ever. The glove in the crypt was yours, but the scent of attar of roses was fresh. You wore it last night. The cufflink and button were planted, old, tarnished, greasy, to implicate your husband. You needed a scapegoat. Mrs. Selby's laugh was high, incredulous. I killed Sergei. He was my friend. Your creditor, Mr. Selby said quietly. I found the IOUs in your desk, 20,000 krone. You pledged the charity to cover them, but the reliquary was fake. Sergei meant to expose you tonight. Mrs. Selby's eyes darted like a trapped bird's. Lies! Miss Marple lifted the reliquary. The bone is genuine. 14th century, as promised. But the Count intended to substitute a forgery at the last moment. You discovered it yesterday when he showed you the casket. You took the dagger then, sealed the case, hid the weapon in your muff. During the fireworks you struck, once, cleanly, the reliquary you slipped into the crypt through the passage you knew from childhood games. Cask produced a small key. This opens the boathouse padlock. Found in your boudoir, madam. Mrs. Selby sank into her chair. Clement saw me take the dagger. He threatened to tell unless I paid him the difference. I followed him to the gallery tonight. The lid was heavy. I only meant to frighten him." Her voice broke. Mr. Selby stared as though seeing a stranger. Hind removed his spectacles, polished them blindly. Kask signalled the constables. "Vanessa Selby, I arrest you for the murders of Count Sergei Orlov and Dr. Erich Clement." She rose without resistance, the violet gown pooling like spilled wine. At the door she turned. "The charity, will it survive?" Miss Marple answered. "Truth survives, my dear, and 5,000 krooni will be found in the Ladies' Aid account by morning. Anonymous, I fancy." Mrs. Selby was led away. The library clock struck 11. Kask gathered the evidence with methodical care. "You knew from the wax," he said to Miss Marple. "From the beginning," she admitted. "In Lyminster, we seal jams with coloured wax. Only the guilty reseal what they have opened." Mr. Selby poured brandy with a steadier hand. "I shall divorce her, of course. The ships will sail." Hind stood. "I must cable the legation. The icons. There will be refunds." Miss Marple closed her notebook. "And the reliquary returns to the cathedral. St. Birgitta will rest quietly." Kask saluted her with the clean dagger. "You should have been a detective, madam." "I am merely an old maid who notices things," she said, and picked up her knitting. The scarlet wool grew another inch. The pattern was complete. Chapter 8. The Quiet Return. The Nordic Star sailed on the morning tide, her funnels already trailing a courteous scarf of smoke across the pale sky. Miss Marple stood at the rail of the promenade deck, her valise at her feet, a light wool shawl about her shoulders against the breeze that carried the tang of pine and tar. Tallinn receded behind her. The red roofs of the lower town, the limestone cliff of Tumpea, the spires of Alexander Nevsky pricking the heavens like dark needles. The cathedral bells tolled 9, a bronze farewell that lingered over the water long after the city had shrunk to a watercolour smudge. Paul Hind joined her, hat in hand, his fair hair ruffled by the wind. He had seen Mrs. Selby, now plain Vanessa Craig once more, escorted to the women's prison on the harbour island at dawn. The violet gown had been replaced by coarse grey. The pearls were in Inspector Kask's evidence locker. "She asked me to thank you," Hind said, "for the 5,000 krooni. Anonymous, of course." Miss Marple smiled. "A small manipulation of the auction accounts. The Ladies' Aid will thrive, and no one need know the source." Hind leaned on the rail. "How did you arrange it?" "With the assistance of a discreet banker in Riga and a forged telegram from the late Count's estate. Money, like murder, leaves traces if one knows where to look." Below them, the gulls wheeled and screamed, diving for scraps thrown by the stewards. The ship's bell sounded the half-hour. Somewhere, a child laughed. Miss Marple opened her knitting bag and drew out the completed sock, scarlet heel, neat ribbing, intended for Raymond's birthday. "You knew it was Mrs. Selby from the wax," Hind said, wonder in his voice. "From the beginning," she replied. "Scarlet sealing wax is distinctive. In Lyminster, the verger used green to mark the communion bottles he pilfered. Mrs. Craig used scarlet to hide the dagger's absence. The violet silk, the glove, the planted cufflink, all pointed to someone desperate to shift suspicion to her husband." Hind shook his head. "And Dr. Clement?" "A loose thread. He saw her take the dagger, demanded payment. She lured him to the gallery with a note, forged in his own spidery hand, I fancy, and released the sarcophagus lid. The reliquary was bait, the clean dagger, misdirection." The Estonian coast slipped astern. pine dark against the silver water. Hind straightened. The legation is grateful. The icons will be returned. The forgers exposed. You have saved several reputations. Reputations, Miss Marple said, are like jam, best preserved with care and honesty. A steward approached with a telegram on a salver. Hind took it, read it, and smiled. From Inspector Cask, the second dagger, museum property, has been returned. The Selby collection is intact, and Mr. Selby sails for Riga tonight. The insurance is settled. Miss Marple nodded. Justice, like knitting, requires the correct tension. Too loose, and the garment sags. Too tight, and it binds. The ship's horn gave a deep, mournful blast. Hind offered his arm. Will you take coffee in the saloon? The band is playing Strauss. Thank you, no. I shall finish this sock and then rest. The Baltic has been stimulating, but Danemead calls. He bowed and left her. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the needles clicking with the rhythm of the engines. The sock grew. So did her quiet satisfaction. Below, the wake stretched white and straight toward the horizon, erasing the path the ship had taken. At noon the Finnish coast appeared, low and misty. Miss Marple packed away her wool, closed her bag, and stood once more at the rail. The spires of Tallinn were gone, swallowed by distance and the pale northern light. Yet, in her mind's eye, they remained, dark, slender, eternal, witnesses to human frailty. She thought of Vanessa Craig, alone in her grey cell, of Felix Selby, already planning new cargoes, of Paul Hind, burnishing his diplomatic future, of Dr. Clement and Count Orloff, beyond all earthly accounting. And she thought of the small bone of St. Birgitta, restored to its cathedral niche, gleaming softly in candlelight. The ship's bells sounded again. Miss Marple turned from the rail and walked slowly towards the companionway. Behind her the gulls wheeled and cried. Ahead lay the long, familiar voyage home to roses and quiet lanes and the gentle, inexorable pattern of English village life. In her bag the scarlet sock was finished, the wool ends neatly darned in. One never knew, she reflected, when a small act of kindness, or a length of coloured wool, might close a circle.